Hello and welcome to the complete masterclass on the King's Indian defense. This 13-part series is something that I've been working on for a while and I'm very excited to present. Today is just going to be an introduction where I'm going to introduce the idea of the masterclass, a little bit about how I went about going and creating the masterclass, and we're also going to briefly look through every single chapter that I'm going to cover. One thing that I want to emphasize is that I will be attaching a PGN file to every single chapter, so you can take those, put those into Chessbase, Chessable, Lichess, Chess.com, and study the moves on your own. Additionally, sprinkled throughout this masterclass, there will be 35 Grandmaster game examples of the King's Indian defense, so you not only get the theory, but also the middle games which arise from the King's Indian defense and how you can successfully navigate those middle games. There's one more thing that I want to emphasize before we jump straight in to the chapters of this masterclass, and that is the King's Indian defense is unbelievably theoretical. If you look at the main line of the King's Indian defense, which is this position right here, e4, d6, knight to f3, castles, this is a classical variation, there are literally thousands upon thousands of Grandmaster games in this very position. So learning the main line of the main line can be quite intimidating. You don't know which games of Grandmasters to look at. So what I've done to try to make this masterclass as least overwhelming as possible is that I've taken 4 players who have devoted their life to the King's Indian defense. These players have played the King's Indian defense religiously, and those are Timur Rajabov, Alireza Firouzja, Hikaru Nakamura, and Garry Kasparov. I took every single game that those 4 players have played in the King's Indian defense, I put it all into one database, and that was the reference database that has been guiding me to choose which lines to look at, which games to consider when creating this masterclass. And so with the exception of just 1 or 2 games, every single game that I'm going to be showing you comes from that reference database, comes from those 4 players. So hopefully there's more of a storyline, more consistency in the lines, and cohesiveness in the playing style from what you're going to see in this masterclass. So with that cleared up, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump into the chapters. Let's look at what we're going to be covering in huge depth in this masterclass. Now, from the chapter list, which you see on your screen in the bottom right corner, you can see that this is a very extensive masterclass. I did not go light whatsoever. I've covered every variation that is critical or common or, important to understand and study. And so the first thing that I want to emphasize is what the King's Indian defense is even about. Now, the King's Indian defense is a hyper-modern opening, whereas black, we're basically surrendering center control to white with the very clear intention to win it back very soon by means of e5 or c5. So we develop our pieces in such a way that prepare and make these pawn breakthroughs very effective. So now let's begin looking at the different chapters that are going to make up this masterclass. The main move here is knight f3, developing the knight, and then very sensibly developing the bishop as well, getting ready to castle. Now we're going to respond here, like I said, by immediately launching our pawn to e5. Now here, the main move is to castle. We're going to look at alternatives in chapter 4 and 5. In chapter 4, we're going to look at the exchange, which is what happens if they take. And in chapter 5, we are going to spend time looking at the Petrosian or the advanced variation, which is the move d5 here. Now, both of these decisions are very committal and they change the pawn structure very significantly. For example, in this Petrosian variation, chapter 5, notice this c5 square is now very much carved out for our knight to get there. So the move I'm going to be recommending is a5, which might look mysterious, but it's actually very logical. We want to get the knight to c5 without giving white the resource to kick it away with b4. So, and similarly, very logical recommendation comes from chapter 4, the exchange, where after they trade the queens and they pin the knight, I'm going to be recommending the very simple rook to e8 to defend everything, keep everything intact. This is one of those endgames that likely will fizzle out into equality, and often, in fact, black is the one that has an edge and pushes for more because, as you're going to see, we often get the 2-bishop advantage because we're going to usually win this light square bishop. So I'm going to delve deep into those in chapter 4 and 5, but let's look at the main line, which is castles. We go knight c6, we're adding pressure to the center. Here they really have to make a decision, and the main one, the almost exclusive one, is d5, and we go knight e7. This is one of the important positions, the cornerstones of the King's Indian defense. where in this very position, ladies and gentlemen, white needs to make a decision. Now, just to explain a little bit about the philosophy of this position, black often goes for a kingside attack. The main breakthrough which makes this possible is f5, and this pawn will march forward. We're going to lead up with our pawns and follow up with our pieces, and we go for an absolute ruthless attack on the kingside, and therefore, the only option white has is to go for an attack on the queen side, counterattacking us. And so there are 3 moves here, and all of those try to achieve that very thing. The first one is knight e1, the point of which is to reroute the knight to d3 to help with this queenside expansion, but also at the same time prepare the move f3 to solidify the kingside a little and give this bishop a nice square on f2. We're going to go knight d7, and from here after bishop e3, f5, this is sort of what I was talking about. The bishop aims over here. But guess what? We're still going to continue g5 here and go for this kingside attack that I've been talking about. So this is going to be chapter 1. We're going to very deeply talk about this variation. Now, chapter 2 is going to look at a different approach that white has to orchestrate the queenside attack, and that is the immediate b4. This is the bayonet, and there's a couple of different ways to play. My recommendation is going to be the main line here, knight to h5, the point of which should make a lot of sense. We're still going to try to open up this kingside by means of f5. Now, the reason that we go knight to h5 instead of knight to d7 is because here we have the privilege to bring the knight to a more advanced square. In the other variation, after knight e1, we do not have that ability. So that's kind of the distinction which dictates where we put our knight. So these are the 3 squares that we're going to basically put our knights in. Knight e1, we go knight d7. After b4, we go knight h5 with the intention of still going f5, and chapter 3 is knight to d2, where here we go knight e8. Knight d7 is also fine and likely will transpose. I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance and significance of these move orders, of course, in the chapters themselves, but the ideas are the same. We're going for f5, we're going for that kingside attack. So this is chapter 3. Now, chapter 4 and 5 I already discussed. Those were the exchange and the Petrosian, respectfully. And chapter 6, ladies and gentlemen, is now moving on to the sidelines. Now, the first sideline is the Samisch with the move f3 here. Now, the point of this move is to solidify the center and prepare some level of perhaps queenside castling, but ultimately a kingside attack by means of this English attack setup where you go for bishop h6. Now, to make this masterclass as cohesive and coherent as possible against almost all of the sidelines, I'm going to be recommending, rather than the move e5, which these sidelines very much are looking for because they're moves that are not so common in direct expectation of the move e5. So instead of going e5, we're going to go c5. Now, not immediately. First, we want to get the king safe. But after bishop e3, c5, this is going to be sort of the system that I recommend against a lot of these sidelines. Now, the way that this often will proceed is that white will lock up the center in many positions, and now we have a Benoni/Benko style position, which is really fun to play as well, where essentially our 2 main ideas are a6, b5, queen a5, and playing on the queen side with these open files, and the center idea of going e6, opening up the center, getting a rook over here. So that is my recommendation against the Samisch, which is chapter 6. Now, chapter 7 is the 4 pawns, which is instead of the move f3, the move f4. Guess what? Very similar idea. We're going to castle and then immediately strike with c5 again because e5 is what they want. And once again, the structures which will come from this are very similar. They can either exchange or they can go in, and proceed with d5. And now, again, the same ideas exist that I've previously mentioned. Now, chapter 8 is the Fianchetto. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Once again, we have almost an identical idea. We're going to castle. They're going to Fianchetto their bishop. This is the main idea of this opening. So we play here d6. They develop their knight. And instead of going for the immediate c5, which is possible, the main move that I'm going to be recommending is knight to c6, but the idea is very similar. Here's what I mean. We're eventually going to go knight a5 and then go c5 on the next turn. So obviously I'm going to talk very deeply about the significance of these different move orders in their dedicated chapters, but the ideas and the structures, the fundamental structures which will arise are basically the same, where again, our ideas are similar, a6, b5, e6, to go about trying to put pressure. Now, chapter 9 is the Gligoric system, and this is actually a system that will take us back to the main line with knight to f3, but the difference in this system is that after e5, they play the move bishop to e3. Now, this move again comes with some deadly intentions, where if we now treat this like a normal classical variation where we go knight c6, well, their idea then is that they get a very improved and superior version of this classical variation. I'll explain why in the video for chapter 9. So what we do instead is target this bishop, knight to g4, and we actually get some very interesting and unique pawn structures which can arise from these very variations. Very fun ideas of f5, ideas to maybe take and open up the bishop. Fundamentally, white has two options here. They can either trade and open the center or close the center with d5. So we're going to explore that deeply in chapter 9. Now, chapter 10 is the Averbach system, which is when white delays bringing the knight to f3 and plays bishop e2 and then bishop g5, developing the bishops first. The intention of this is to stop us from having the ability to go e5, because now, due to the fact that there is this pin, after this trade, knight e5 is in fact very dangerous here. So the way that we respond in this variation is that we're going after bishop g5 to play knight a6 to defend over c7 with the intention of preparing e5. And so we're going to delve deep into this one. It's a very interesting setup, I think a little underrated from the white side, because it can cause some problems to black if we're not prepared, but we are prepared. And in fact, I'll show you the main line, e5, d5, and guess what? We get this same setup that we're used to, where a5 is coming to stop b4. You can see how I'm trying to make this masterclass very cohesive, where all of the variations are similar in very interesting and fundamental ways. Now, this takes us now to chapter 11, which is the Makhachkov, which is h3. This is actually something that I used to play as white against the King's Indian. I think it has a lot of venom, especially if black is unprepared. The main point of this sideline is to go g4, which makes f5 not possible, which again is our main breakthrough, but also launches and prepares to launch a huge kingside assault against black. And so the way that we're going to fight this is to castle, of course, and then go e5. Now, the point, fundamentally speaking, is to then go a5 and again situate the knight on the queen side. Essentially, white is going to go for a kingside attack. We're going to allow them to do that, and in the meantime, go for a queenside attack. So again, g4, it can seem scary, especially if you've never seen it, but I'm going to kind of show you how to diffuse this setup, because as it turns out, objectively speaking, this is not a great choice for white to go with. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the final chapter that we're going through is the London system, which is after d4, knight f6, not even going for the center expansion, but instead playing the London system, bishop f4, knight f3, e3, c3, the normal developing setup of the London. Now, the London is not very effective against the King's Indian setup, because the setup that we go for, as a reminder, where we put our bishop on this Fianchetto square on g7 and we play d6, well, guess what? This structure is directly meant to expand with e5, which now only comes with tempo. It comes with, even more initiative and an attack on the bishop. And so this is what we go for, right? We castle, we go d6, knight to c6, we drop the knight back, and again, the idea, strategically speaking, is to expand in the center, and tactically speaking, sometimes there could be some winning ideas. If the pawn's already on f5 and the bishop is on d3, then this is actually a common tactical forking idea. So you can see that this is a very fun way that black can gain initiative from the opening against the London. Now, as a reminder, every single chapter will have a PGN for it, where you can download that and study the moves. I really put a lot of time into this masterclass. I think that you're going to enjoy the recommendations that I made, because I tried to make learning the main lines as simple as it can be. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you're prepared to tackle the King's Indian defense. I'll see you next time. Peace out.